How do you get to school every day? Maybe your parents drive you. Maybe you take the bus. Or maybe you roll there on your moped, skateboard, or bike. Whatever mode of transportation you take, we are along for the ride. Everywhere you turn, things are turning around you. Spinning, rotating. Take a look. We are in the fields, out to sea, and in the air. We are in your home and at the factory down the street. Our job is to make things rotate reliably, and that all begins with reducing friction. We've been doing that job for more than a century. The year was 1907, and our founder, Sven Winquist, worked as an engineer at a textile factory in Gothenburg, Sweden. He invented the very first self-aligning ball bearing, revolutionary at the time because it was a new flexible design that prevented wear and tear and eventual machine breakdowns. In the years that followed, we played a pivotal role in the evolution of industry, first in Sweden, then around the world. We even founded Volvo. But enough with the history lesson. Let's fast forward to today. SKF operates in 130 countries, works across 40 different industries, and has a global team of 45,000 employees. We are a leading bearing supplier, manufacturing pretty much every type of ball and roller bearing there is. But what you may not know is that we also specialize in lubrication systems, seals, and services. Lubrication is a substance used inside the bearings to reduce friction and make sure the machines run smoothly. Seals are used to keep the dirt out and the lubricant in. An example of a service is the monitoring of machines. It's possible to see how healthy the bearings are by measuring things like vibration and temperature. Often, we help our customers use that data so they know ahead of time when repair of their machines is needed. We call it predictive maintenance, and we use it in places like paper mills and mines. Bearings are becoming smarter, and so are the machines they're used in. You may have heard the term Internet of Things, the connection of everyday objects to the internet and to each other. Smart machines that send data and communicate are all part of the connected industrial world, a world where we want to be a technology leader. So in this shift to digitalization, it's important we have world-class engineers. In addition to our own technology research and development, we team up with technical universities around the world to ensure we work with the most talented young engineers out there. Maybe you will be one of those one day, helping us prolong product life cycles, researching new materials, making a difference. We believe it's important to do business the right way, in a sustainable way, because it affects the communities we call home. There are over 1 billion cars on the roads today. An SKF wheel bearing unit can reduce friction by up to 20% compared to standard units, and that saves a lot of energy. And that's just in cars. If there was just a little less friction and less weight in all we designed and built, imagine the possibilities.
We are truly everywhere.
And that's never going to change.
Because everything around us will keep turning,
Spinning.
rotating.
We are creating a world of reliable rotation.
So our crusade
against friction and weight continues.
That work will never be done.
will never be done.
Will never be done.
It's a never-ending story.
Välkommen till SKF.
Hi everyone and welcome to SKF. We are here today for a lunch seminar on the topic of sustainability. We are in our headquarters in Gothenburg, as you could see in the video that you saw now, in our studio together with 2 students and our head of sustainability. So my name is Elizabeth Hjelm and I actually work in the HR department. I am HR business partner for our development organization, but also part of the group HR management team. My role here today is to facilitate this meeting and discussion, and also because I do these things because I think it's very, very fun to be able to join and interact and share how we work at SKF and with even more people. So what we will do is we will start by introducing us. Then we will have a discussion based on some questions that we have got in on this topic. And then we will finalize with a live Q&A session. So please put your questions in the chat during the session and the discussion. So we will take them in the end. But first of all, Max and Swati, 2 students here from Handels, could you please present yourselves?
Yeah, my name is Max and I am head of Enviro Travel on the student association called HAS, Handels Students for Sustainability.
Yeah, I'm Swati. I'm currently studying my master's in international business at Handels itself. And I am also part of the HAS, and I'm currently also working in the Handels Council for Sustainability to develop their sustainability strategy, and that is why I'm here. I'm interested in sustainability and how SKF is dealing with their sustainability strategy.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, one of the persons that we have with us is Johan Lannering, our head of sustainability and clean tech department. Can you present yourself and what it is you do at SKF?
Yeah, I'll give it my best shot. I think a common question we get when we talk about these things are, how do you integrate sustainability in what you do? And I think that's a really, really important question. And I think what we've done in SKF, and in a way this is manifested through my role. So I'm responsible for group sustainability, which is typically climate targets. But as you know, sustainability is not only climate. It's sort of EHS, safety at factories, it's product material compliance. Get rid of chemicals, REACH, ROACH, a lot of legislation, which we internally want to. When we started, we saw it as a hygiene factor. You need to onboard of this, but today I would also say it's a business driver, because actually, how can we go to our customers that are also on this journey and basically make them choose us ahead of competition? That creates an enormous pull for what we're trying to achieve. So I have this group sustainability I'm responsible for, which works, daily in the same management teams as you could call it, or the strategic function is called SKF Nova. Which works with all group strategies, and if I would use a bold word, we're trying to be sort of the think tank. What will we look like in 20 years? What will happening? How do we capture these big shifts that are happening in the world? And on top of that, I have a responsibility for clean tech, which is basically when we see these issues coming, how can we address them? And as you know, we are a bearing company, which is kind of cool because we're actually in every machine that rotates. The stuff that we do is not so exciting always, but what you could do with it really rocks. So we've noticed that by connecting the knowledge in the sustainability teams through our sales departments, looking at markets that will grow. I think this picture here illustrates wind. It's growing ridiculously. We've been in that for 20 years. But just to sum up, to finalize, what really gets me going are the new technologies. And this is if there was an audience here, I would have asked you, what do you think this is? It's the size of a Boeing 747. This is a tidal power plant. And we are delivering the blue boxes there on the sides. We call them TIE fighters because they look like TIE fighters. But those are actually the pitching blades. And that whole system on that side is delivered by SKF. So in this area, we've spotted a number of years ago a new renewable market where we are not delivering to the gearbox manufacturer. The gearbox manufacturers are delivering to us. And I would say without a doubt that we are a market leader in this area. And this little thing is going into the waters today. And it will, in a couple of months, start producing renewable energy from the moon, which I think is enormously exciting. But I will stop there. But just to try to make a description of what's my day job. So,
that's cool. Like talking about climate change and climate impact, this is also a good solution. But what are your biggest emissions? Like what sectors do they come from?
If you're in a company that has anything to do with steel, it's steel. Since I knew of this question beforehand, I could prepare a slide. But I think if you talk about the protocols, or how do you talk about emissions, this you basically talk about scope 1 and 2, and that's what you as an industrial company can control according to the greenhouse gas protocol. So we control our manufacturing. These are our factories, and this illustrates the chunk of emission that's related to what we do. And we could drive that down by sourcing renewable energy, by electrifying everything, every single machine that we have, get rid of all fossil components, basically energy efficiency, and at the end, have that small box as small as possible and as green as possible. But if we look at the product's life cycle and what's necessary to fight climate crisis, because we will be focusing a bit on climate, I think, during this hour, these are the scope 3 emissions. And as you see, they are ridiculously more higher than the other areas. And I think for an industrial company, typically you embark on the journey with scope 1 and 2 in your own backyard. And as I said, this is a hygiene factor. We've set a target to be neutral there, climate neutral at 2030. But it's only covering a small space of where our products are. The second step that companies typically go to is the raw material side. And here you have, if you work with steel, the first thing you do, buy scrap. If you buy scrap steel, you don't get the emissions that come from producing steel. The part where you need virgin steel, the steel part that hasn't been produced once, that's where the projects you all seen about like hybrid steel, how can you use hydrogen, energy, etc., to produce steel. Then that becomes of interest. And I want to point out we follow 11 such hybrid steel projects only in Europe. So that's a really, really big driver. And it's also totally transforming how steel power plants think, which is quite exciting. Then, of course, we have the transportation. That's very much linked to quality. Bad quality, you have to fly it somewhere. But the emissions that you have on logistics, especially if you use air freight, are ridiculous. So, and that's a really, really difficult part. That's an area where we control. We have targets to reduce them by 40% till 2025. We're actually not succeeding in that, mainly because of, in parallel, the need to supply just in time has increased so much. So to capture that, we're actually working on automating our factories so they become much, much quicker. And then we can have a nudging with our customers where we show if we fly it, it has these consequences. If we're not flying it, and that is also enabled, I think, through people are opening up their digital systems. So we don't deliver a product that ends up on a shelf for 6 months. That would be waste. Because now we go to the third bucket here, used by customers. And I would say if you go on an aircraft, that CO2 is probably up to the ceiling. I mean, it's so high. But if it's a bicycle or a skateboard, it's 0. If it's a car, an electric car, which has the electricity mix that you have in Sweden, for instance, it's very low. But if it's on the electrical mix in Asia, which is predominantly coal, it's very, very high. So there are a lot of aspects there. And then, of course, the end of use. How do we, in circular matters, bring this back? So to answer your question there a bit shortly, it depends. We are in 40 industries. We're in every country in the world, apart from a few. So it really depends on who we are delivering to. But what I find so exciting is this customer use phase. Because if you have this approach, this life cycle thinking, it might actually be so better for the climate to fly a component somewhere to have it up and running. Because sort of the basic where we want to be with our customers is to provide uptime. Because imagine a steel mill, for instance. They can easily emit 1 million tons of CO2. But if their factory stands still because of a failure in a bearing, for instance, they are typically still consuming that amount of energy without producing. So I think it's been since more than 100 years one of our sales pitches. How can we make your stuff work more efficiently, more energy efficiently?
Yeah, and on the topic of that, I mean, Swati, I know the next question that you have is definitely connecting to this. So
yeah, definitely. It was very interesting to hear that you were telling about controlling the emissions from the factories, and you're controlling virgin steel coming from Europe. And so I was wondering, like, SKF is a global company and it's working with different regions around the world. So how is, when we talk about sustainability, it's also about building a corporate purpose and a culture. So how is SKF dealing with that in different regions, especially when it comes like thinking like different regions, they have their own perception of sustainability. So, I mean, I think it would be quite interesting to know how you're dealing with that.
That's one of the reasons why I wanted to work here, frankly. I mean, it's the culture that you have colleagues from all over the world. I work for the European Commission and the Swedish government and the UK government, but SKF is more international. And what I've come to realize is that people are the same all over the world. You could mean different things, but at the end of the day, we're proud of our cultures, our families. If you have children, you know, everyone are proud of their children, including myself. And I actually feel that sustainability, if I talk to my Indian colleagues and friends, it's much higher on their agenda. I mean, if you walk the streets in many cities, you have plastic pollution everywhere, you have really poor air quality in many areas. Same goes if you talk to, smog, very prevalent in China and most of Asia. So sometimes I think that I would say in Northern Europe or perhaps Sweden foremost, we have a perception that other countries are not as onto this. And frankly, when I talk to my colleagues in many other countries, I mean, it's a complete open door to do this. They are, and what I'm talking about, they are doing this. I mean, it's so fundamental. And it's moving so quickly. So sometimes I in a way question in the way we can come a bit from above, on our high horses and look at we have such a good emissions, but what have we actually done? We exported our emissions. I mean, if we look at that, we will probably get into that, the energy mix in a country. I don't think that we are in this country are aware of, China or most of Asia is 57 to 60% coal. So everything you buy is enormously polluting and typically flown here if you order it through internet. So but I would even go so far with something that struck me when I worked in SKF, that there is some kind of a annoying mentality in SKF. I call it the SKF soul, and we laugh about this. But it's typically I really come from the business side, and I want us to charge for our knowledge. I mean, we're a knowledge company, but it's so often, but the customer had the problem, so we fixed it anyway, And but I also like that, and I think with this thing, it sort of taps into the mentality. We're all people. We live here. We're not evil just because we work for a company. And I think in the same way, everyone wants to, if you enable them, to leave the customers in a better way when we find them, and actually leave the planet in a better way than we find it. Can you write that down? I think that was
I think it was a good one.
Slogan.
Yeah, I think that's a good one.
So talking about like what we were talking about before, like with circularity, like you work with scrap metals, like you said, 70% of your metals are not virgin, they're scrap metal.
In Europe, yeah.
In Europe, yeah. So not in the whole world, like not globally.
No, because it's if you look at if you take that in Asia, it's growing. So you don't have scrap. Yeah. You haven't come to the point where you could collect the scrap, and that's why solutions like the hybrid steel we talked about is paramount. I mean, it's so important. And I actually read today that there are significant hydrogen projects kicking off in China. No surprise. So.
But yeah, like as we said before, like the energy mix in Asia is also still a lot of coal and fossil fuels. So even hydrogen will not be green there because it's produced by it's electricity. Yeah,
absolutely. It's only depending on hydrogen. Well, hydrogen is still better than coal. Well, you could say everything is better than coal, but it's a huge difference, of course, if you produce it from renewable energy or or through a fossil energy source. Good point.
Actually, you were talking about pitch, which SKF had. So I was wondering, like, when we talk about strategy, like it's about doing everything different from what your competitors are doing. So I was wondering about how sustainability can contribute towards the unique competitive position which SKF has, and like if you feel that sustainability can continue to be a sustained competitive advantage for SKF. So.
It's fascinating. Had you asked me, I got that question at a seminar a year and a half ago, and I had to say we're pushing for it. But honestly, when we talk to customers, no, it's a price. It's only price. But then last year, during this terrible pandemic, something happened. You know this, you've seen. But what happened then? Pretty much every economy have set carbon neutral targets. But below the radar, almost every economy are looking at emission trading schemes to put a price on carbon. And I think that's the interesting part. China embarked on, in January, on that setup. It's still, it's like $3 a ton, but you're setting the structures. So I think where we are now, this triggers the investments, it triggers the questions we get from investors, and it really taps into what we're doing. And I've been on my job as also being responsible for group sustainability for a year, and I've been kicking in open doors, to be honest, because we tried as early as in '89 to have product ranges that would fit this void, because our CEO at that time felt that this is really something that's needed. We entered a lot of these climate organizations. It was called Beyond Zero, a product portfolio that came. But I think, it was a good business, good technology development, but it isn't really until now that the knowledge we built up and the structures that we set are paying off, but they're paying off a lot. So I would say, I usually bring a bearing when I talk. It's good to show. The bearing from the beginning was for energy efficiency. If it can rotate easier and be smaller but still really hard, you could downsize, you lose less energy. Then you need oils in the bearing to make it run smoothly, and they are polluting. They're fossil. So then you add seals. So we're market leaders in seals. And then you start looking at, so you have an application, it doesn't leak, it can operate for a really long time. But how can we really tell when it's breaking? That was the first thing. Well, you add a sensor. So you connect the bearing, and this one will let you know, I'm not feeling too well. We should probably replace it. Then we could start our factories, and we could take this one and remanufacture it, sort of repair it and send it back. But where we are now is that, how can I drive your factory's performance in the best way? How can I make sure that your electrical motors gets the input to reduce your energy consumption? And of course, that changes our business models fundamentally. You're renting this bearing. It's a license, it's a software. The real key thing are the algorithms that let you know what to do. And I think all that thinking were driven a lot about sustainability at heart, but also, of course, uptime is a cost saver. So today, with many customers, and we talk to especially the ones that are the first movers in the whole renewable energies, I think you need to have it. And I would say, in very short time period, having a carbon neutral manufacturing or have really, really good data on everything on that will be just a given. I don't think you would ask for it. It would be a hygiene factor. That's our assumption. And when we talk to customers, it fits their assumptions.
Yeah.
So when you talk about climate neutrality and carbon neutral, you have a goal for 2030 to become carbon neutral in scope 1 and scope 2.
Or manufacturing. Yeah.
Exactly, manufacturing and electricity emissions.
Yes.
But different companies are working right now with getting climate neutral, and then they work also with scope 3, the other emissions, like the goods transport, manufacturing, raw materials. And to be certified by the different international standards to be climate neutral, you kind of have to work with the scope 3 as well.
Yeah.
So how are you guys thinking about that in your goal?
We are working like hell on that. As you see on this slide, which still remains here. I think it makes sense. The scope 1, our manufacturing, here. I mean, it's our backyard. I mean, that's our hygiene. But here we can do a lot of things. But we have suppliers in the thousands and globally. And in some areas, like in China, you can't buy renewable energy. It's you say what energy you want and you get it. But it's changing. So what we are doing is that we are requiring our suppliers. Well, if you take one step back, you do an audit of all your suppliers in all sustainability areas. Either they fit or they don't. It's fairly binary. Then you have areas like energy management, where we have ISO standards that we require, and that's just, so we force our suppliers, and many of them, of course, want to. I mean, they see this too, to provide the energy data. But we apply, you could say, like an 80-20 rules. So we start with the most energy-consuming suppliers, and I think what's really interesting, and we've been launching this year, we have the beta version last year, it's a software where we can measure energy efficiency improvement, and carbon for our biggest suppliers. And that also makes it possible for us not to be binary, but to say, by next year, you must have this, and by next year, you must have this. And we can also start comparing suppliers. But I think if we're looking at the increase in carbon taxes that is coming, that this is also a given. We feel that we're a bit ahead, being in the steel area, but we're being chased now by our competitors, which is frankly good.
And talking about suppliers, like these are the smaller boxes, and then we have the use by customers. Yeah. Do you use this 80-20 rule with the customers as well? Have you been thinking about maybe excluding like coal power plants and the really intense emission?
No, I think that's a very, very relevant question as a company. Should you start excluding business? We are still selling to coal mines, but I could tell you, if a business is sort of disappearing on its own, it is. But I do think, I mean, those are the questions you have to ask yourself when you embark on this journey. We're still selling to it. We have the same with Maybe it's better like that.
Let's see here.
Yeah, I'm talking now. You hear me. There you go. Got disturbed. Maybe I said something that wasn't okay, and I was. I don't know where you lost me, but I'm saying I think it's important to look at what markets you are, but I also think that the customer use phase is our key market. That's really where we focus our most resources, because that's also, I think, by having a sustainability discussion, and just to show you, this is actually in real life, what does this analysis look like? So this is for an automotive product. This is typically how we sit down with EV manufacturers. Could be Tesla, it could be any European, because they're all very forward. Then you actually break it down, the various components, what's the environmental impact in transportation, and who is handling what, and there you get like a map here where to do your job. And as you see here in this component, this is actually a product where we have a lot of renewable energy, so very, very few emissions that you can get rid of. But here, raw material in this area, it's just too high. And here you have to work with renewable energy from suppliers, and also at some point, because not everything can be scrap hybrid steel. And we think that will be up and running by 2030. That's our hope. But I should let you know that depending on where the steel comes from, if it's a Asian steel, it's about the carbon footprint is about 250% higher. So I also think that's also sort of really key aspects in the sourcing.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's very interesting to know that you're working with externally with your customers, your suppliers, and also you said you're working with various transport to manage these emissions. So I was wondering, how is SKF working with these sustainability strategies internally as well? Like you mentioned about the group sustainability. So to what extent is this sustainability strategy decentralized? Is it towards other functions as well, and what other external agencies you are working with, is it SMEs or open innovation when it comes to sustainability?
I think this is the most important question. I mean, and to me it's about culture. if I would stop the answer there. But how do you get there? This is the most common question and discussion I have with other head of sustainability in other global companies. How do you really get this understanding? It should be as important as we're making money or any other thing you take for granted. I can show you. Actually, we released our quarterly report today, and if you take tone from the top, we report what we call our clean tech revenues, which is about 7 billion. That's according to the sort of just the clean business. That's a driver, and those targets are of course spread down. But then we also have our path to on CO2 emissions and our energy consumption and also accident rate, because those are sort of the big drivers, and under them, of course, you have an enormous amount of targets depending on chemicals or grinding swarf, quality is linked to sustainability, etc. But I think that's a key thing to have these numbers next to the profit the company is doing. I think that's a signal. But then the most fundamental thing, which has taken decades to get through, is that there is no separate group sustainability that works on sustainability issues. It cannot be separate. An analogy I often use is that what we're seeing today is as profound as digitalization. Someone knocking at the door, going with a computer, "Oh, hey guys, do you think something will happen?" I mean, it's the same thing with the climate crisis. It's not they will take care of that. So if you look how we operate, is that the factories, the operators are responsible for energy. But then, of course, you need to have, really good control systems, so you can measure and control and follow up and have good targets, et cetera, et cetera. We work really closely with our unions because, of course, everyone thinks this is important. So it's a good driver. It's in a way answering the why. Why should I go to this job? Why do I go to work? And that's going back to your question on culture. That's actually as important for a person in Latin America as it is for a person here. So we're all the same. And if we talk about, as your second question there, how do we interact? We work with a lot of startups, and we work with universities, and we're out there. We have our own innovation programs, and I think that's the beauty in a way of being so big as we are. And that's a bit of a funny story. We started last year when we said that we want to look for markets that are outside of our core. I mean, typically, we are in stuff that rotates in oil and water. It's dirty, it's factories, and there's some cool skateboards, but that business is not so big. And then a year and a half ago, we bought a company called Recon Oil, and they work with, you could say very simply, they make sure that industrial oils, and there's a lot of oil in every machines, that you don't have to replace it, that you actually clean it. And that was why we bought the company. Because, I mean, typically, you could have 100 tons of oil in a factory, and you just replace it. You throw it out, put in new, throw it out, put in new. And we could say, no, you never have to do that. And we have examples where you have had the same oil running in a factory for 7 years. I mean, it's obvious benefits. But what's turned out is that with this solution that we have, the oil is so fine. So actually the quality that you get out of operating, because typically, when you operate something, the oil gets dirtier and dirtier, and you can't really do your finest stuff. But now it's perfect all the time. So it was actually a performance enabler. And I think that triggered us also to move into other areas. So one of my responsibilities is to look at what are the adjacent technologies that we could fit. And they should have a big impact on environment. So here we operate in air quality, in water, etc. And we have a number of companies that we're looking at. And which excites me the most is that we're also doing something actually in India, which is completely outside of our business, but where we think it has an impact. And here we're actually working on plastic recycling. So I'm also the CEO of a new SKF company, which we call the Waste Company. We thought it was funny, but that's what we're looking at, basically working with recycling of plastic in India.
A lot of things is definitely happening.
Yeah.
And guys, time flies on this super interesting topic. So we have time for one more question here, and then we will go into the live Q&A. So Swati and Max, who wants to take the last one?
Should I go? Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
So last but not least, there is a lot of politics involved in companies of your size, of course. Like, what kind of climate policy would you guys wish for to come true?
Global carbon pricing.
Easy as that.
Because it's such a driver. I mean, we are. I'll actually show that slide. I think it's of interest. This is a speculation how you can look at carbon pricing. But and here we are comparing a high carbon steel with a low carbon steel and get the price impact. It's to simulate a thinking. And the more the carbon pricing goes up, the quicker we will have hybrid steel, the quicker we will have hydrogen solutions, and that's awesome business for us. So we are talking to universities on all of these new technologies. How can we be there? What products is needed to enable these things? And it's funny, right now, the European Union have said 2025 we're going to be 65 euros. Typically it's been around 30, but the financial markets are moving in. So we talked about this, it's like 46 or something like that now. But that has a driver. And I think it will go up to 150, which is if you have the polluter pays principle. So that's what I'm betting on. And perhaps that will not happen until 2030. But at that point, carbon capture will be cost efficient. A lot of these technologies will be cost cheap. I think just tapping into that, let's see if I had, because I think this one is one of the more exciting slides. This is a projection of the energy use.
Now the sound disappeared again.
The sound disappeared again?
Yeah.
I'll move that. Am I back? I think this slide, just want to mention this in this context. I think it's very, very exciting. We mentioned that we're looking at the electrification of everything. So this is how they think that the energy need will be in the world and what it will be made of. And if you're in a company that's in everything that rotates, this is kind of fun. I mean, this is where we want to be. I mean, and the only thing we know is that this projection is wrong. Because if you look at the projection on a yearly basis, it grows ridiculously every year. Because the more hydrogen you're asking for, the more renewable energy you will build, and the cheaper the renewable energy will be, enabling other products that could use renewable energy. And I talked to my daughters about, so what do I think about climate change? And I would say I'm actually totally depressed because we're not making it at all. The only positive thing is that I do feel that companies are moving, and I do feel also when I talk to my customers that they want this. I mean, I think it's important that this corporate evil person does not exist. I think they operate in reality. Companies want to sell what other companies and ultimately perhaps consumers ask for. It's just that right now no one is prepared to pay that price. But as we're seeing with carbon going up, it will happen. So,
yeah, great. Okay, guys, we're going to go into the Q&A session with a bit of live questions from other students that have joined the event.
Cool.
And one of the first ones here, Johan, is corruption has been a theme discussed recently as a barrier to sustainability. Is SKF working against corruption internally and among your customers?
Yes. Absolutely. We've been from the top, we've been members of Transparency International for ages. We also do audits on our customers before we sell. And we also do audits with all our suppliers. And of course, I mean, we do audits on us internally because, and we do fire people, a number of people every year for being in breach of the code of conduct. I typically say that's the easiest way of losing your job. And I think it's a great question because sometimes I've been active in Amnesty, and I have friends that work for, Doctors Without Frontiers. But sometimes I think what the world needs accountants without frontiers, because corruption is a parasite. Because it destroys everything. Yeah. So it's a huge problem.
Yeah. Agreed.
So more accountants.
More accountants. Good. Okay, and the next question we have is 5% of all the world's energy is used to produce compressed air. Only 8% of the compressed air is used to mechanical energy. The rest is waste. How is SKF working to make compressed air more efficient in your production?
I think one thing is to get rid of compressed air. I think that's the most important thing. Go for electrical. Then there are some some areas where you need compressed air, and then we have programs for that because leaks are so difficult to detect, and it's difficult to always track them. But it's and you could go for better compressors, etc. But I think that compressed air in many operations is used in ways that it shouldn't be. It's used for like cleaning off something, etc. And that's really something to address. There are a good number of companies now providing solutions in this area. So that's if you want to start a business, I think that could
be a good area to get started.
Area to start in.
Good.
A good question.
Yeah, and the next question that we have, are you focusing mostly on CO2 reduction, or are there other areas you focus much on? Is it mainly environmental sustainability, or do you have any project regarding social sustainability?
I think it's fair to say that if you want to achieve things, you have to have a focus, and right now our focus is a lot on the environment, because eventually it will kill us all if we don't do it. But of course, the social aspects are very, very important, and I think the key thing here is what's perhaps a bit under the radar, but something we focus a lot of is of course also human rights in the supply chain, and that's in a really broad meaning. But it's a good thing. We don't have a lot of those problems in our supply chain. I think the biggest problem which we're struggling with are probably scrap metals in Asia, where we can control. You can control up to a certain level, but when you have like in many Asian countries, there is a risk that you have children working as pickers, collecting things, and then how do you make sure that you don't get that? And I think in India, we have for example, we have a very big social program. It's also mandatory in India. I think that's fair to say, where you have to, I think it's 2% of your turnover you put on various educational program. And I think that's, it's a huge issue where if I have concerns somewhere, that's where I have my concerns. Yeah. And I think we're aware of it and we're working on it. But then, of course, I mean, we do social things.
Yes,
but in the grander perspective, that's, can I say this, nice. But what's really important is working with supply chain. That's where you really can have an impact.
Have an impact on it. Great. And the last question then in the Q&A here is, many people have a trouble defining sustainability. How do you define it?
Oh, so do I. I think that's the answer. I think I come to that point, and it came from digitalization. I mean, let's not. How do you define digitalization, which is the main tool of handling sustainability? I'm happy that people want to talk about it. It very quickly ends up in climate, but I think it's important to point out, and I think I do that pretty much every time, that sustainability is much, much more. And then by providing some examples, there are definitions that you could pick up. The UN has definitions, etc. But it doesn't really. The definition story to me doesn't take the discussion in a way. But if you look at, if you use the word sustainability in a corporate context, you typically talk about all those, what should I say, softer areas. Yeah. In SKF, which is also funny if you took about the legacy I had, when we started on our sustainability journey, there was no definition at all. So we had our own, which we call SKF Care, which is basically based on society, business, our employees and customers.
Exactly. Great. Okay, time is flying. And actually, we need to finalize and sum up here. So from my perspective, I would really like to thank both of you for coming here and having these great questions that Johan could share SKF's thoughts on. And thank you so much for joining us. Johan, is there anything, like a last point you want to make here in the last minute?
No, I think it's been. I mean, it's extraordinary fun to getting these questions. It triggers us. It puts our ear on the ground a bit, and I hope when we do this at some point, there could be a big audience with even more questions. I think what I want to tap in is that remember that it's a paramount shift. This shift is as big as digitalization. make sure that wherever you go, that the people that run this have knowledge about these things and do not only speculate, because digitalization to me was driven by people in too many management teams that did not even know how to program a computer. So there is some stuff to learn, and this is an awesome opportunity for all of you. And tapping in there, if you don't know how to program a computer, take a quick course.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining. We really hope that you have appreciated the session today, and hopefully we might hear more from different students in the future. So thank you from us, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.